account to share with you that was published originally in 1887 in a book titled The History of the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians of Michigan. And it was written by Andrew J. Blackbird, son of Ottawa Chief Mac Appenny. And it was published in Ypsilanti, Michigan at the Ypsilanti Job Printing House. And the entire book, which is not real lengthy for the time period in which it was written, where they tended to make things lengthier, it provides a personal and family history of the author, who of course was Native American. So I'm going to share this with you I'm going to jump right into this. It is a fascinating account, giving much very interesting information about Indian life in the 1830s, 1840s era. So let me begin. The Indian tribes are continually diminishing on the face of this continent. Some have already passed entirely out of existence and are forgotten, who once inhabited this part of the country, such as the Mosh-Kodesh, the Hurons, the Ossagoes, who formerly occupied Saginaw Bay, and the Ottawa Gamis, whose principal habitation was about the vicinity of the Detroit River. And they are entirely vanished into nothingness. Not a single page of their history can be found on the record of the history of this country, or hardly an allusion to their existence. My own race, once very numerous and powerful and warlike tribe of Indians who proudly trod upon the soil, is also near the end of its existence. In a few more generations, they will be so intermingled with the Caucasian race as to be hardly distinguished as descended from the Indian nations, and their language will be lost. And I myself was brought up in a pure Indian style, and lived in a wigwam, and have partaken of every kind of wild jubilee of my people, and was once considered one of the best pipe dancers of my tribe. But when nearly grown up, I was invited by a traveling Protestant missionary whose name was Elvin Coe to go home with him to the state of Ohio, and with the assurance that he would give me a good education like the white man. And the idea struck me that I could be really educated and be able to converse with white people. At that time, in the fall of 1840, I missed the opportunity. The idea was never after off my mind. Sometime afterwards, I started out voluntarily to obtain an education, and I had nearly succeeded in completing my professional studies when I was called away to come home and look after my aged father in 1850. And now I have 4 children, but not one of them can speak the Indian language. And every one of these little Indian urchins who are now running about in our town can speak to each other quite fluently in the English language, but I am very sorry to add that they also have learned profanity like the white children. For these reasons, it seems desirable that the history of my people should not be lost, like that of other tribes who previously existed in this country and who have left no record of their ancient legends and their traditions. Before proceeding to record the history of the Ottawas of the state of Michigan, to whom I am immediately connected in their common interests and their future destinies, I propose to this country as prisoners of war. But they were afterwards adopted as children of the Ottawas and intermarried with the nation in which they were captives. Subsequently, these captives' posterity became so famous among the Ottawas on account of their exploits and bravery on the warpath and being great hunters that they became closely connected with the royal families and were considered as the best counselors, best chieftains, and best warriors among the Ottawas. Thus, I am not regularly descended from the Ottawa nations of the Indians, but I am descended, as tradition says, from the tribe in the far west known as the underground race of people. They were so called on account of making their habitations in the ground by making holes large enough for dwelling purposes. And it is related that they even made caves in the ground in which to keep their horses every night to prevent them from being stolen by other tribes who were their enemies. It is also related that they were quite an intelligent class of people. It's by cultivating the soil, they raised corn and other vegetables to aid in sustaining life besides hunting and fishing. And they were entirely independent, having their own government and language, and possessing their own national emblem, which distinguished them and as distinct and separate from all other tribes. This symbol, ensign, of my ancestors was represented by a species of small hawk, which the Ottawas called the Pipiguan. So we are sometimes called in this country in which we live the Pipiguan tribe instead of the undergrounds. And it was customary among the Ottawa that if any of one of our number, a descendant of the underground, should commit any punishable crime, all the Pipiguan tribe or descendants of the undergrounds would be called together in grand council and requested to make restitution for the crime or to punish the guilty one, according to the final decision of the council. There were several great chieftains of the undergrounds among the Ottawas who were living within my time, and some are here mentioned who were most known by the American people, particularly during the Great War with Britain in 1812. Most of these chieftains were my own uncles. One was called Latewing, who took a very active part for the cause of the United States in the War of 1812, and he was a great friend of Governor Lewis Cass of Michigan. Wing was pensioned for life for his good services to the United States. He was one of my father's own brothers. Chaubigny was an uncle of mine on my mother's side who also served bravely for the United States in the War of 1812. He traveled free all over the United States during his lifetime. This privilege was granted to him by the government of the United States for his patriotism and his bravery. He died in the state of Illinois about 20 years ago from this writing, and a monument was raised for him by the people of that state. Wakizu was another great chieftain who died before my time in the country of Manitoba out north. He was also one of my father's brothers. It is related that he was also a prophet and a great magician. Now, my own dear father was one of the head chiefs of the Arbor Croche, now called Middle Village of Goodhart, which latter name was given at my suggestion by the Post Office Department at Washington. Now, my father died in June 1861. His Indian name was Makadipinasi, which means Black Hawk, but somehow it has been mistranslated into Black Bird. So we now go by this latter name. My father was a very brave man. He has led his warriors several times on the warpath, and he was noted as one of the most daring and adventurous in his younger days. He stayed Wakizu among other tribes of Indians and white fur traders in that section of the country. Many times he has grappled with a narrowly escaped from the grizzly bear and treacherous buffalo, which were then very numerous in that portion of the country. He has seen that there are things that would be almost incredible at this present age. Liquor sold to the Indians measured with a woman's thimble. A thimble for $1. Wow. One wooden coarse comb for 2 beaver skins. A double handful of salt for 1 beaver skin, and so on in proportion in everything else. The poor Indian had to give a pile upon pile of beaver skins, which might be worth $200 or $300 for a few yards of flimsy cloth. Englishmen and Frenchmen who went there expressly to traffic with the Indians generally started from Quebec and Montreal, leaving their families at home. But so soon as they reached this wild country, they would take Indian wives And when they left the country, they would leave their Indian wives and children there to shift for themselves. Consequently, there are in this region thousands of half-breeds, most beautiful men and beautiful women, but they are as savage as the rest of the Indians. No white man there ever told these poor Indians anything about Christianity, but only added unto them their degradations and robbed from them. Was once there, left to perish on a lonely island by the fur traders, not because he had done any particular crime, but simply from inhuman cruelty and disregarded of Indians by these white men. He was traveling with these traders from place to place in a long bark canoe, which was the only means of conveyance on the water in those days. It appears that there were two parties, and two of these long bark canoes were going in the same direction, one of which my father was paddling for them. He was not hired, but simply had joined them in his travels. But these two parties were thrown into a great quarrel about who should have my father to paddle their canoe. Therefore, they landed on this little island expressly to fight amongst themselves. And after fighting long and desperately, they left my poor father on this little island to die, for they concluded that neither of them should take him into their canoes. He was just left to die. What must be the feelings of this poor Indian, to whom life was as sweet as to any human creature? What revenge should he take upon those traders? He had a gun, which he leveled at them as they started off in their canoes. His fingers were on the trigger when suddenly a thought flashed across his mind. Perhaps the Great Spirit will be displeased. So he dropped his gun and raised a fervent prayer to the Almighty Ruler for deliverance from this awful situation. And after being several days on the little island, when almost dying from starvation, fortunately deliverance came. He spied a small canoe with two persons in it within hail range. They came and took him off from his dying situation, and it was an Indian woman with her little son who happened to travel in that direction who saved my dear father's life. Now from this time hence, my father lost all confidence in white men. Whatever the position or profession of the white man might be, whether a priest, preacher, lawyer, doctor, merchant, or a common white man. He told us to beware of them, as they all were after one great object, namely the grasp of the world's wealth. And in order to obtain this, they would lie, steal, rob, or murder if need be. Therefore, he instructed us to beware how the white man would approach us with a very smooth tongue, while his heart is full of deceit and far from intending to do us any good at all. He left Manitoba country about 1800, or about the same time when the Shawnee prophet Wawoya Gishiwama, who was one of Tecumseh's own brothers, sent his emissaries to preach to the Ottawas and Chippewas in the lower and upper peninsula of Michigan, who advised the Ottawas and Chippewas to confess their sins and avow their wrongs and go west, and there to worship the Great Spirit according to the old style, as their forefathers had done. There's a footnote that I want to read to you before we continue on. The worship of the Great Spirit consisted mostly in songs and dancing, accompanied with an Indian drum, which has a very deep and solemn sound, almost, all not very large, about a foot in diameter. I used to think that the sound of it must reach to heaven where the Great Spirit is. Continuing from the text. And to abandon everything else which the white man had introduced into the tribes of Indians, and to abandon even their mode of making fire, which was by flint and steel, and to start their fires by friction with 2 pieces of dry wood, as their forefathers made their fires before the white people came to this country, and to eat no flesh of domestic animals, but to eat nothing but wild game, and to use their skins for their wearing apparel and robes, as the Great Spirit designed them to be when he created them. He taught them that the Great Spirit was angry with them because they conformed to the habitats of the white man, and that if they did not believe and practice the old habits, the Great Spirit would shake the earth as an evidence that he tells them the truth. A great many Ottawas believed and went far west accordingly. And it happened about this time that the earth did quake in Michigan. I think, if I am not mistaken, the earth shook twice within a year, which is recorded in the annals of this country. At the earthquake, many Indians were frightened, and consequently many more believed and went west, but nearly all of them died out there because the climate did not agree with them. Sagaki growing plant was the head chief of the Ottawa Nation of Indians at that time, and was one of the believers who went with the parties out west, and he also died there. This is the second time that the Ottawa were terribly reduced in numbers in the country of Arbor Croche. Now there is one more side note here I'd like to share with you. This chief Sagaki was Nisa Wakwat's father, the last head chief of Little Traverse. Nasa Wakwat was the only child remaining alive of the whole family of Sagaki. Therefore, the child was brought back to this country and was the last head chief of the Little Traverse, now known as Harbor Springs. And that completes what I wanted to share with you in this particular installment. I hope that you enjoyed it. They come down A.J. Blackbird came down very, very harshly on the white people. And being white, I hate to say this myself, but they had every good reason to detest the Europeans who took advantage of them and treated them horribly and caused them to become alcoholic dependent and brought many diseases like smallpox and decimated thousands and thousands and thousands of Indian lives. When we talk about reparations today, these are the people who, if anybody's going to get reparations, these are the people who deserve the reparations. They truly lost everything. Now, I'm not saying that the people who used to live, who are descendants of slaves, should not have reparations, but the Native American ought to have them before anybody else gets them. If anybody gets them, the Native American should. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed sharing this with you. I will have something new for you very soon, and I pray that you all stay in good health, happy and safe. God bless each and every one of you, and I love each and every one of you on the other side of that screen. And God willing, I'll be back with you very, very soon. Have a great evening.